What is up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands. But before we get started, I have a couple things I want to talk about really quickly. First off, I'm doing a Facebook giveaway for 1% of my $25,000 high roller buy-in. It will be played Thursday, 2 p.m. PST. So if you want a piece, head over to Facebook at Doug Polk Poker and enter to win your chance at 1%. Also, some big news coming up here. I'm going to be doing a poker news show with Joe Ingram 1. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him. I know some of you are. Hey, Poppy. It's going to be called Table Talk with Polk and Poppy. And we're doing our first episode next Wednesday at 11 a.m. PST, 2 p.m. EST. So it's going to be like a pardon the interruption style show. We're going to have a bunch of topics. We're going to have a timer. We're going to do some buy or sell. We're going to do some different stuff. So should be fun. We're going to make it a weekly thing, and I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. Okay, so on that note, let's go ahead and jump into a hand played in the 2014 one-drop between Scott Seiver and Tobias Reinkemeier.
Now to Scott Seiver, 29-year-old pro with one bracelet, King 10 of spades.
I love Scott, but he dresses every day like he's on summer vacation between 7th and 8th grade.
He's got $11 million in live earnings, a raise to $1.2 million from Scott Seiver.
Rick Solomon dresses like he doesn't give a damn.
German pro, Christoph Vogelsang folds his button. Colman in the small blind, Jack 9 of diamonds.
Starting at 9.6.
Colman looks more stylish in black than in white.
He folds his small blind to Tobias Reinkemeier with aces.
German-born, lives in London. His favorite city is Melbourne. And just before one drop, he visited San Diego and loved it. What's not to love?
Reinkemeier with the aces just calls. I guess he doesn't want to scare Seiver off.
So most hands that we do here on Poker Hands, we kind of just go through pre-flop quickly and then move into the analysis on later streets. But I actually think that there are a few interesting decisions made here pre-flop that I want to talk about. Starting with Scott Seiver's open with King 10 suited in the hijack on about 17-ish blinds. Now, this is pretty close between raising or just open jamming. Both seem totally fine. Remember, if you open jam, you're going to, win something around 1.2 million if it gets through. And when you are called, you're going to have a good amount of equity with a suited Broadway hand like King 10 suited. That said, it's probably a little bit better just to be raising with a chance to take down the blinds and make your hand look strong. Here's the only problem I would say on this stack size. If you're going to raise small with too many hands, you make jamming on you a very profitable opportunity for some of the shorter stacks or some of the people that just have you covered and they can 3-bet you, 3-bet your open. So while I'm in favor of this play, I think it's probably the best play that could be made here pre-flop. I might not make it the minimum like he did. I might make it like 1.3 or 1.4 million, but I'm a fan of this play. That said, you want to be careful to not make too many raises and make your open too weak. So the next decision that we have in this hand is Dan Colman in the small blind with Jack 9 suited. And this is a really awkward spot to have a hand that's as strong and playable as Jack 9 suited, but you're in the small blind. In fact, if I was in any other seat, I would probably like to play my Jack 9 suited, but in the small blind, you're in a tough spot. You're going to be first to act post-flop. You're not getting nearly as good of odds to call as you'd get in the big blind. And then additionally, the big blind can occasionally squeeze, putting you in a tough spot. Now, those things said, it is a min raise from Scott, and he's certainly going to have some hands that aren't as strong as aces or kings or queens in this situation when he opens. So you might have enough equity against the range to call. I could see folding, calling, or 3-betting all being very reasonable plays here. They all make some sense. I think if you do like to play 3-betting, small is probably the best play, representing a very strong hand like aces or kings or ace-king, etc. But at the same time, I don't really mind letting it go. And if you wanted to loosen it up and go for a flat, that's okay too. Although I would mention, I would keep my opponent in mind when deciding to call. Like let's say that Nui opened, I don't think flatting here would be as good. But if Seiver opens or the button opens, could be much more reasonable situations to go for the flat. So now the action gets to Tobias, and he has a pretty interesting decision to make here with aces. He could flat and try and trap his opponent pre-flop, or he could 3-bet either to a smaller size or even an all-in size, and see if his opponent ends up having a strong hand. Now, I am always a fan of trapping people in poker. Trapping is a great part of the game, you protect yourself, etc. But I'm not entirely sure that I like a call here to begin with. When Scott opens on this stack, he's going to have a lot more strong hands than, a normal open would, because he's going to be all in jamming with hands like 7s or 8s, or maybe ace queen off, ace jack off. So this raise is actually a pretty strong hand, or a relatively weaker hand. For those reasons, I think I like a small 3-bet, because then if he calls, he's not going to have equity against your aces, and additionally, if he has a stronger hand, he's going to go with it pre-flop. By calling, you risk several things. You risk a hand like jacks or 10s now not being able to put in all the money, and you also risk letting some hands like king 10 suited potentially get there against you. That said, it's still reasonable to trap aces. If you want to trap a pre-flop hand, aces are the best hand to do it with, because there's never going to be that ace in the flop that kills your kings. Every flop's going to have 3 undercards. So I'm okay with the call. I probably lean towards 3-betting. Let's go ahead and take the flop.
4 queen deuce, Reinkemeyer's aces are not threatened.
These two have played a lot of super high rollers together.
Reinkemeier checks his aces. Seiver's king 10 must be playing in a different game, because there's nothing there in this flop.
Seiver hopes a continuation bet ends matters. It will not.
You think this is a leak in a lot of pros, don't you? A continuation bet is a continuation loss. $1.5 million from Seiver with the C bet, as they say.
And this is setting up perfectly for Reinkemeier. He's got Seiver right where he wants him, Lon.
Well, Reinkemeier slow played the aces pre-flop. What does he want to do here? Well, just a call.
The flop comes queen 4-2 with 1 spade and 2 clubs, giving Scott Seiver 1 overcard and a backdoor flush draw, and Tobias the strong, powerful aces. Tobias checks as he should with all of his hands, and now it's up to Scott to make a decision. He decides to bet here, which I think is the correct play. You can make your opponent fold a bunch of hands like maybe an ace high, or put him in a tough spot with a weak pair. And if he has a hand like 8-7 of, hearts, you're pretty happy taking it down the flop and preventing him from hitting pairs that can beat your king 10. So I like this bet, it makes sense, and he can look to barrel some later streets. Back over to Tobias, he now has another decision to make. He can continue to set the trap, or he can go for a raise. I'm a little bit more okay with either option here. I do think check raising has some value. If he has a flush draw, you're going to be able to check raise and jam turn, putting that hand in a very tough spot. Additionally, if he has a queen, you're going to win all of his chips. This also lets you throw in some bluffs with maybe a hand like, 6-5 of clubs, or the nut flush draw, or hands like that want to be able to bluff and take your opponent off their equity. So I don't really mind this decision either way. I think calling and raising are both reasonable plays.
Turn card now. Jack of clubs. Reinkemeier still best. Seiver now open-ended, and Tobias has to worry now about a 3rd club on board.
Will Reinkemeier continue to let Seiver stab at it?
Tobias checks again.
If I saw Scott sitting on a park bench like this, I'd figure his wife had left him, or his dog had been run over by a car, or he just ate some really bad bulgogi. We saw him continuation bet on the flop. Then when you keep betting on the turn, I call that C-bet squared.
Where I'm from, we just call this a double barrel.
It can win you a lot of pots, or it can get you in a lot of trouble. I never C-bet square.
I'm all in.
Wow, there's a playa.
How much is it?
All in for over $6.8 million.
Boy, Seiver dangling on a cliff. Reinkemeier has slow played his aces exquisitely. He's played like he's not strong. Now he's a bit unsure and in a dicey spot.
6.825.
Scott Seiver applying maximum pressure, well, the maximum pressure he has, to Reinkemeier, who has the bigger stack.
Scott, I was trapping. Trapping.
This is for 2/3 of his remaining chips. If Tobias calls here and loses his hand, he'd be down to 5 big blinds.
Am I allowed to tell my hand by the way? That's the best.
Everyone knows your hand anyways.
You really? What is my hand?
It was either king, queen, or ace, queen. It's the only thing you would ever call.
You're wrong, man.
Oh, wow.
I'm better than them.
Ooh, that's a nice
I have
hand.
the best starting hands possible.
poker?
In poker.
Nice. With the club?
With the club, I would have paid the bet already.
I understand. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
I know.
It's brutal, though, right?
I know, it is brutal.
And on one drop, too.
I know, it's like not...
But you can't sweat it, you know? These things just happen.
I could still throw my hand away.
So the turn comes the Jack of Clubs, and now Scott Seiver picks up an open-ender. This isn't really the best turn the aces want to see, because now obviously flushes have got there, Queen Jack's ahead of you. If he somehow bet a hand like Jack's on the flop, he turned a set. So there's definitely some hands that can have you beat now. Tobias checks and is back over to Scott Seiver, and he elects to go all in with his open-ender, trying to get his opponent off a hand like probably a 2 or a 4. You know, I think Scott maybe thinks he could get his opponent to fold a queen, especially some weak queens. But I don't really think he's imagining that the big blind's going to fold anything close to a strong queen. So when he goes all in and Tobias starts to tank and then starts talking about how good his hand is, I think Scott's actually a little bit surprised by how strong his hand is and is now tanking. In fact, the table talk is actually quite honest in a way, when even though he's bluffing and kind of trying to get him to fold, obviously, he's still telling him like, oh, with a hand that strong, you sort of have to call. And that's true. When you have aces here in this spot, there's something that I often think about in these situations when I'm debating calling off my stack. And the question is, can I beat some value bets? And it's very reasonable to think Scott would go all in here with ace queen, king queen, or kings. Sure, this isn't the best turn for those hands, but if he checks the turn, his opponent could hit a flush, a backdoor flush with one card. He could pair up on the river to 2 pair. He could hit trips, etc. So denying that equity plays, is a fairly large factor. I mean, really, if you open here in the hijack and the big blind calls, what hands have you beat? He's not going to call pre-flop with hands like queen 2 off, queen 4 off, 4 2 off, probably. So he really only has you beat if he has queen jack, a flush draw that didn't raise the flop, or a slow played set. And those things are all just so unlikely compared to him having a hand like a queen. The most common hand he's going to have in this spot is certainly just a random queen. So aces is far too strong to be letting this go. And this jam, maybe when you're playing live poker, it looks like it's a lot more than it actually is. I mean, it's 6.8 million. But the thing is, this is a 17 blind deep pot. And additionally, there's already 6.2 million in the pot. So it's only a little bit more than the size of the pot. Aces are so strong that you actually beat some of the value bets. So you just can't let that hand go. I do like Scott's decision to bluff with this hand. There are some other hands that could be reasonable to bluff with, like maybe ace 10 with a club, ace king with a club, 10-9 suited could be reasonable. So there are quite a few hands that make sense in Scott's shoes to be jamming here as a bluff. And aces can beat the bluffs and beat some of the value bets. I'm a little bit confused what happened in this hand, but it's certainly one of the most epic decisions to be made in the $1 million one drop.
For all of Seiver's chips and almost all of Reinkemeyer's chips.
Well, Tobias with the best hand, but if he's up against a flush, he's drawn dead. If he's up against a set, he's got 2 outs. If he's up against 2 pair, he's way behind.
Reinkemeier running out of time. And he folds.
There's no chance that's aces. That would
Impossible.
be no chance.
Show.
How can you do that?
Reinkemeier is stunned.
Nice hand.
I do have to say, I love the needle. How the hell do you do that? And you look so frustrated, like, oh, God. And then just like throwing your cards at your opponent, like, yeah, here's the value, brah. Had to be a sad moment there for Tobias playing in the biggest tournament in the world. But you know what, guys? That's part of poker. Sometimes you make the wrong laydown and your opponent's bluffing you. The key is to try and make good decisions regardless of that. And luckily for Tobias, his decision was bad either way you want to look at it. Thanks for joining me here today for Poker Hands. I'll see you guys next week. You know what they say, good things come to those who subscribe. Or is it, with great subscription comes great responsibility? I can never remember.